This was a professional sniper taking a shot from 335 metres. That has never happened in Australia before. That's why this particular bikie death will go down in history, for its sheer audacity.
Pistol shots ring out in the barroom night. The opening line from the epic Bob Dylan protest song Hurricane, an ode to the wrongly convicted boxer Reuben Hurricane Carter. In December 2020, it was also the song chosen to begin the commemoration of another notable fighter, Nicholas Thomas Martin. Days earlier, Martin had been the one who had succumbed to shots ringing out in the night, not from a pistol, but a high-powered rifle. And not in a bar, but among the cars and bikes at the Kwinana Motorplex. It was a shot heard around the world. The assassination of one of WA's most fearsome bikie heavyweights in front of hundreds of people, including his wife and family. Brazen, brutal, and the beginning of yet another blood-soaked chapter in WA's bikie history. The shooting sparked an unprecedented response from both police and politicians. The cops were trying to find a killer, while also trying to avoid an all-out OMCG war across Perth. The Pollies decided enough was enough and greenlit a wave of new laws to try and eliminate bikies from WA altogether. And more than 3 years on, the echoes of that shot are still being felt and heard, even this week, with an extraordinary legal action claiming damages for the damage. Joining me again to talk through the various legal and illegal ramifications of the murder of Nick Martin is the West Australian's chief reporter, Ben Harvey. Morning, Ben.
Morning, Tim. This is the shot that stopped the nation back in December 2020.
Yeah, it's certainly stopped the bikie nation in its tracks, and many more from that besides. So, in short form, who was Nick Martin and how did he become one of the biggest bikies, physically and figuratively, in Australia?
The first time we ever knew that Nicholas Thomas Martin even existed was courtesy of a 28 October 1988 news story in the West Australian newspaper on page 26, where we learnt that he had been busted driving like a maniac at the age of 18. He was a sheet metal worker back then, and he was fined $2,000 in the district court. The next time we heard him, he'd beaten the crap out of some people at a nightclub called Aqua in Northbridge, where he and a few others were fined $2,000 for assault, occasionally bodily harm, and that's also following, as I'm reading on the page right now, he was also convicted for assault in 1992 and 1993. So 1988, dangerous driving, 1992-93 assaults, 1996 assaults at a nightclub, and he just went from strength to strength.
Before all that, Nick Martin had actually been born in the UK in 1969 to father Sid and mother Rhoda, and according to his mother was a fucking huge baby. The doctor who delivered him even commented on how big his fists were in the delivery room. He emigrated with his family at 6 months, went back to the UK briefly, but returned as a kid to Australia, going on to cause mayhem on the rugby field and in the classroom. At 17, he left school, he left home and began work as a bouncer. In between then and 2005 were those offences that Harves is just talking about. And in 2005, he joined the Rebels as a nominee. By 2008, he was their state leader. Harves, this is a very quick elevation. Does that go to Nick Martin's reputation and ability, or the club's fragility at the time?
I think it was a case of cometh the hour, cometh the man. He was in the bikie landscape at a time when we were just getting rid of that long, straggly beard, dirty denim, shirts like this, and we had the advent of Nike bikies, and Nick Martin was one of them. He's absolutely enormous. It looked like Uluru was walking down the street towards you whenever he was in the suburb, but he didn't actually look like a traditional bikie, and this was just the sign of the times. The Rebels were in a bit of a state of flux because their long-serving state president, a guy called Rick Roberts, who went by the very imaginative nickname Rebel Rick, had been chucked in jail for about the 19th time at around 2003. I don't know who was leading the club in 2005 when Nick joined, but there seemed to be a bit of a power vacuum, and the Man Mountain filled that vacuum.
And his wife was later to go on say it was Martin who built the club from nothing and gave, you know, all the members that were there at his funeral in 2020 everything. I mean, is that close to the truth?
It's absolutely 100% correct. He turned the Rebels from a joke of a club. There was a running joke that if you fell asleep near a Rebels clubhouse, you'd wake up with a patch on your back. Such was the low level of expectations for you to get into the club. You didn't have to have performed major crimes like you'd need to do with the club deros. You could get away with a nomination period of under 12 months compared to 18 months or sometimes even 2 years with some of the older gangs. They just wanted to have numbers, and that's why they became the biggest bikie gang in Australia by a long way.
2005 marked another sliding doors moment for Nick Martin. He met his match, or what his father would later call his perfect match, in a lady called Amanda Shoppy. The courtship between the pair lasted for years and didn't really align with Martin's growing public persona. The hulking, brooding bikie boss in public, the man who brought Nando's and romantic DVDs to his girl by night. The other women in his life were his daughter Tia, his sister Renee, his mother Rhoda, all describing him variously as a teddy bear, a protector, a rock, their special boy. But the man, the rebel, was a fighter, not a lover, and was wanted or hunted by police and rivals for years. In 2010, his long-time friend Mario Perrin, a man he introduced into the Rebels fold, was shot dead at his house in front of his family. Tensions ensued. An armoured vehicle fitted with a battering ram made an unannounced visit to the Rebels HQ, and skirmishes with the ambitious Rock Machine gang defined Martin's early leadership, as did his reaction to being shot himself outside his own home as he rode up on his Harley.
Atra Street, Balcatta, the scene of last night's shooting. Rebels leader Nicholas Thomas Martin shot in the left elbow. Police say the bikie chief took himself to hospital around 9 o'clock. He's still there now, waiting for surgery.
He discharged himself from hospital the next day and then went public, showing off his bandage and a bullet hole in his bike. That hit was ordered from within Rock Machine. One of those was convicted of the shooting. Martin, obviously, was now still committed to the cause. Raids, fires and ongoing feuds with other gangs persisted, with the Rock Machine and the Comancheros both trying to take him down. Ben, a family man fighting gang feuds on at least two fronts at this stage.
He had his work cut out for him. So the war with the Comanchero had been imported from Sydney, where the rebels had been fighting with that gang for a very long time. So it seems to have just come across the Nullarbor. The Rock Machine tit-for-tat skirmish, he described it in his own words as a matter of honour. Now, normally when bikies talk about a matter of honour, it's a matter of money. And what they're talking about is someone owed someone money and they welched on the bed. And it could have been a case of someone patched over from another club and didn't pay the correct amount of money as a make good. Could be someone patched over when they still owed their dues to the old club. But I can guarantee you it came down to the folding.
And despite all the attraction that he was getting from both police and other rivals, Nick Martin, by this time, had cemented himself as the leader, and that was partly due to his. He wasn't shy about getting on the front foot, going out in public, and projecting this persona to people like you and me.
He was a rock star in the bikie world. We would have to go back to Eddie Withnell in the Coffin Sheeters circa 1988 Bindoon Rock to go back and find a bikie that had actually engaged with the public. And Nick Martin was not shy, as you said, about talking to journalists. In 2010, a crime reporter at the West Australian called Luke Elliott sat down with him and talked about how he'd lost a mate to a drug overdose. And he talked about how he was devastated. I mean, I've got the actual quote here. He's saying he was a great dad. He loved his kids. He had a good laugh. He was a good, fun bloke, a little character. That's all he was. You know, that didn't happen in bikie land. You didn't have state presidents of outlaw motorcycle gangs talking emotionally about other gang members who had OD'd. So it was very, very unusual. And that force of nature that Nick Martin was in 2008 through to 2018, really, when he was in his heyday, he was a magnet for new members. They loved the fact that they could be hanging out with Nick, and the club grew and grew and grew. They had something like 18 clubhouses at one stage, you know, 400 or 500 members. This was when he wore that Rebel Army T-shirt.
He wasn't joking.
He actually had a battalion behind him.
By 2018, however, the pressure appeared to be telling. In that year, he punched out a Rebels associate in front of shocked families at Malaga markets. Two Martin allies, Sergeant-at-Arms Adam Hyde and a gang member called Luke Walker, were both locked up. And then Martin and his wife Amanda were arrested and charged with extortion and money laundering offences, accused of trying to extort cash from a tattoo parlour owner and a car from their former accountant. The tattoo parlour charges were eventually dropped, but the others remained, on top of allegations of tax evasion. Legal bills were piling up, and with dozens of Rebels members now either locked up or defecting, the club Nick had built was slowly disintegrating. Harves, is it right that around this time Martin actually stepped down as president?
Yes, and that's not uncommon for presidents or high office holders in OMCGs. He was in and out of jail, and he had all sorts of anti-association orders against him. He basically couldn't run the club. So, and in that situation, people will voluntarily step down because it's impossible to do your job. And so that is a very common thing to happen in gangland. It was misconstrued by some people as him turning away from the club or the club backing away from him. That wasn't the case.
And then in November 2020, Nick Martin walked into the Sandbar Hotel in Scarborough and bumped into another man. Harves, getting a hiding from a Hell's Angel in public is obviously not good for one's health, but not good for one's reputation either.
No, I reckon if I was having a quiet beer at the Sandbar when those two went toe-to-toe, I would have died of a heart attack right then and there, just from witnessing it. You've got one bloke who is 200 kilos on a lean day in Nick Martin, and then you've got this tattooed meat axe in Dane Brakovich from the Hell's Angel, who is a former cage fighter, going toe-to-toe as the waves crash on the beach a couple of 100 metres away, and terrified beachgoers are running around saying, what on earth is going on? The interesting thing with this footage, and everyone can probably remember it, if you're listening to this, you would remember the footage of Dane Brakovich and Nick Martin having a fight at that bar in Scarborough, is Dane is absolutely hammering him. Dane's a professional fighter. Nick's a big unit who used to work doors. Dane knew fighting skills. Dane was going at him really hard, and Nick, once it was over, picks up his thongs and walks out. So this is the thing. We always say Dane Brakovich beat the shit out of Nick Martin, and he kind of did.
But Martin walked away.
He just walked away, and he just kind of sauntered away as well. He wasn't like holding his guts or anything like that. He'd been pounded on the back of the neck for about 30 seconds straight. Didn't seem to actually make that much of a difference to him.
And you've written stories about sort of other public altercations between bikies, and what you actually do. Inevitably, these public altercations, whether they be between bikies or just plainclothes police officers, are caught on CCTV. And what you do and your reaction to them, and how you appear on the footage can materially affect your standing in the club. I mean, you've written a story about another gang member recently who ran away and then was booted.
The days of CCTV have made being staunch really hard. There's no doubt in my mind that before widespread CCTV and mobile phones where everyone is a film producer waiting to happen, bikies used to run a lot, okay? Nowadays,
Fight or flight.
Yeah, if you run, you will get busted by your club for not being staunch. This happened to a guy called Brett Chaos with a K, Peachy, who is a journeyman in bikie clubs. He's been members of all sorts of clubs. He had an incident at a shopping centre in Kingsley where he was menaced by two very large members of the Mongols gang, and he produced a knife, looked at what he was up against and decided that it was better to run. Now, I'm on his side. I would have been running like you would not believe. The problem is it was all caught on camera and it went viral. And therefore his bikie club at that time said, you're out. You are a complete and utter embarrassment to us.
So Martin's reaction was obviously physically impressive, but he still had the wherewithal to know I've got to hold myself here somehow.
Yep.
Yeah. A month later, December the 12th, 2020, a Saturday evening in the twilight, Martin, his wife Amanda, her daughter Stacey and her partner Ricky Chapman were among friends at one of their favourite places, the Drags at Kwinana Motorplex. The event was, somewhat aptly, an outlaw nitro challenge. At just after 8:30 p.m, with around 2,000 people in attendance, including a 5-year-old sat on his stepdaughter's knee, Nick Martin was shot once in the left side of his barrel chest. He knew immediately what had happened, even if those around him struggled to comprehend. First aid was attempted, CPR was performed, but Martin was dead before he had even left that familiar spot. Ricky Chapman had also been struck by the same bullet which had lodged in his arm. He survived, but chaos ensued. Ben, we've covered some shocking bikie-related crimes on this podcast already, but this was another, or one that rivalled anything.
We'd never seen a hit like this, ever, in Australia. This was an assassination you'd expect from Mossad, not a bikie gang. Bikie gangs do their dirty work, their wet work as they call it, close up. You see the CCTV and it's always a guy putting a handgun through a car window and shooting someone from 30 centimetres away. This was a professional sniper taking a shot from 335 metres. That has never happened in Australia before. That's why this particular bikie death will go down in history for its sheer audacity.
How did you hear about it? It was a Saturday night, late Saturday night, and what was your immediate reaction?
I was, as always on a late Saturday night, probably asleep. I heard from about 15 different police officers who'd rung me saying something had happened, and it very quickly became obvious that he had died at the scene. I rang the editor of the West Australian, who'd also been getting phone calls, and said, no, it is confirmed. He is dead. And a very, very senior police officer had an off-the-record conversation with me where he was very concerned about the repercussions, like very, very concerned.
And to give some illustration, I got a call from someone from the police minister's office who had also been told the same thing and was equally concerned, not only for the workload that was just about to descend on everyone, but also the obvious implications of the most noticeable, visible and bikie in Western Australia, with the biggest name being shot in cold blood in front of his family on a Saturday night.
Well, this is the most bizarre thing, as we'll talk about a bit later. Everything that we feared never came to fruition. And that is something that was very confusing for a long time. It was actually only a few months ago when Nick Martin's one-time good mate, Carl LeBrook, got up in court and in defending himself, he said, actually, everyone hated Nick's guts by the end.
The reaction from the WA police and the public was a combination, obviously, of shock, anger and trepidation. And the reaction was also unprecedented.
Today, our government is announcing a reward of up to $1 million for information about that killing on the weekend.
Big money, $1 million to catch the killer of a big man. Task Force Ravello smashed in doors, raided properties, locked up plenty of people. All while Martin's lavish and at times bizarre funeral was being planned. That funeral, which was held ironically on the same day as the sentencing of the Claremont serial killer, was fronted by former ABC presenter turned celebrant Verity James.
Single most bizarre thing I have ever seen in 25 years of covering bikie violence. Verity James, a lovey from Auntie, giving the rebel salute at the end of Nick Martin's funeral. You just could not make that up.
Let's raise our fists one more time.
The live stream is still available for anyone who's interested. I rewatched it yesterday, and it is bizarre for many reasons. The fact that Verity James says the F word and the C word with forceful...
Practice ease, I might say. Practiced ease.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that she's on one leg because she's done something to an ankle or lower leg, so she's hobbling along, holding Nick Martin's father's hand while he walks in front of a coffin covered in $100 bills with a photo of his son. The fact that she then calls up these various rebels leaders from all over the country, it's just... bizarre is one word. It's more than that. It is absolutely strange. Stranger things I have not seen, I don't think.
I don't know what she got paid, but I reckon she would have done it for free because that is a story that is a dinner party stopper for the ages.
Correct. As I said, the coffin covered in replicas of $100 notes. Black leather, chrome, mullets, obviously the dominant attire. But amid all the muscle were memories from Martin's family. Police were also there, obviously, watching for trouble and also just in case the killer came to make sure Martin was gone. But he wasn't caught then, or the next month, or the month after that. It was March, the Ides of March, in fact, the 15th, marking the day Julius Caesar was assassinated when police swooped.
Detectives from Task Force Ravello have charged a 34-year-old man with the murder of Rebels OMCG member Nicholas Martin at Kwinana Motor Complex on 12th of December of last year.
Ben, you wrote at the time of the arrest of the alleged sniper, as he was then, that it had surprised even some sort of insiders who thought an identification and arrest was quite a way off.
Police were completely all at sea with this. They were smashing down every door they could find, and nobody was giving any information. They were up on more phones than you can possibly imagine, and they just weren't getting anything. They genuinely had no idea what was going on. And it's a testament to the methodical nature of modern police work that they actually got to an arrest, because it was a combination of old school CSI style forensic analysis, a bit of luck, but data. Terabytes of data that was interrogated to hone in on the suspect.
And I think it bears mentioning that the man who led Ravello was also the man who led the hunt for Cleo, which was also painstaking and data-based. Rod Wild. I mean, I would love to have a couple of red wines with Rod Wild completely off the record and just tell me the highlights of his career, because you'd probably be there till gone for, I reckon.
I think Rod would say you don't want to know what goes into the making of a sausage, to be honest.
Eventually, once some of the background of this man came out, I mean, the arrest was a sensation, but what led him up to that point in his life, that he was lying in a camouflage suit aiming at Nick Martin, was a sensation in itself.
A thrill-seeking adrenaline junkie was how he was described when police started working out who he was. He was a mercenary working for an organisation called Shadows of Hope, which is basically ex-military people who go into war zones like a modern-day A-team and try to rescue and help people who are the victims of war. And that can be in Syria, it can be in the jungles of Colombia, it could be in the jungles of Southeast Asia where this particular person did a lot of his training and a lot of his work. You could not make this up. This guy's background was straight out of a Jason Bourne franchise. It wasn't what you'd expect in Perth, Western Australia.
Amanda Martin's reaction to the arrest was also telling. It's a sense of relief, she told the West Australian, but there is more to this. And so there was. Even as the man accused of pulling the trigger ground through the courts and eventually pleaded guilty 6 months later, the investigations continued. And a month before the sniper was due to be sentenced, the baker was arrested and charged. Ben, who's the baker? What's his background and what is he accused of doing?
The baker is a guy called David Pye. Rebel turned Comanchero turned Mongol, bit of a freelancer in the underworld. He's obviously called the baker because his surname is Pye. This is how stupid I was. I assumed that he was called the baker because he was a meth cook. And even when I found out his name, I still didn't make the connection. He is a huge, hulking, brooding bloke who is currently sitting in a cell waiting for his trial to start, which will be later this year. We knew nothing about David Pye, really, until he was arrested for this alleged crime. We'd seen him walk out of court next to Nick Martin a couple of times, but we'd never actually known anything more about him. He was one of those guys that just did his business, whatever that business was, quietly under the radar. He was the opposite of Nick Martin.
And the allegation is and remains an allegation, which Mr. Pye has denied and will go to trial on, is that he paid the sniper to shoot Martin because of a long-standing feud, and the money was partly up front, partly back-ended after the job was done, and he was the instigator, was the ringleader, and was the one that found this man, somehow realised a particular set of skills he might possess, and then sent him out in the world to use them to knock off Nick Martin.
The assassin was within the orbit of the rebels' bikie gang. The assassin actually worked on Nick Martin's house when Nick Martin was building his new home. So he was within that part of the underworld. So I don't know, that's how he and David Pye ended up meeting, but it wasn't completely random. There was some kind of a connection there.
And the allegations against Mr. Pye, as they remain allegations, don't stop there. He's also accused of plotting to kill more people.
Comanchero in exile, Ray Chile, to be precise. Just when this story couldn't get any more fanciful, David Pye is alleged to have commissioned the assassination of Ray Chile in Thailand, and the assassin was going to dispatch Ray Chile by machine gunning him to death as he walked out of a bar. That old chestnut.
As you do.
Yeah.
In December 2021, the man Pye is accused of paying to kill Nick Martin had his day in court, and it was a big day. Prosecutors outlined the entire tangled web. His membership of Shadows of Hope, Pye's defection from the rebels to the Comancheros, and his determination to see Martin gone. A $10,000 down payment, a $150,000 bounty, a detailed reconnaissance mission, including cyber surveillance and even flying a drone over Nick Martin's house. Visits to the motorplex when Martin was there and when he wasn't, even sitting in the big man's favourite spot. Test firing, changing tyres, false rego plates. And on the last night of Nick Martin's life, his killer stood just yards away from him as he took his seat before he left to put on a camouflage suit and gloves and take his pre-scoped spot some 335 metres away, along with a .308 rifle equipped with a magnifying scope and rangefinder. Then he waited and watched for 15 minutes before he pulled the trigger. WA's Supreme Court heard that days later, having allegedly been shortchanged $50,000 for the job by Pye, he took his rifle to a gunsmith to have the barrel swapped. That gunsmith kept that barrel, and when police eventually came calling a month later, he still had it and handed it to them, which added to CCTV from the motorplex showing him there, fingerprints on bundles of cash, and a shoe print from the sniper's nest which matched the shooter's trainers. Even his defence lawyer, Simon Freitag, conceded it was incredibly serious offending. But two public interests collide forcefully, Mr. Freitag said. The offender has provided cooperation of such a significant extent, and it is so important to the state and the prosecution of Pye, that we say it ought to result in a fixed term being imposed. In other words, a sentence other than life for one of the most brazen killings in WA history. Ben, Justice Stephen Hall eventually handed the sniper a 20-year term because of what he had promised to tell about David Pye when it eventually comes to trial.
And you reckon that David Pye's lawyer is not going to bring that little point up when they do open the case in October of this year?
Cooperation is it's always a grey area. I mean, because you do it because you want to cooperate, but you also do it because you wanted to get the best deal for yourself. This cooperation, obviously invaluable, and not only in the Nick Martin murder, but potentially the plotted murder of Ray Chilly. But as you say, it'll be the first thing that Paul Holmes tells his barrister to say.
What inducements were made for you, Mr. Sniper, to testify here today? You were looking at life behind bars, Mr. Sniper. Instead, you're going to be out in a few years. What did you tell the police? Anything they wanted. Isn't that correct, Mr. Sniper? That's what they're going to say, I suspect. And they've got a playbook here, because I just have to go back in history 20 years to a guy called Sidney Snot Reed, who turned over on the Gypsy Jokers gang. And because the cops gave Sid so much in return for his testimony, he only ended up doing about 10 years, it discredited his testimony completely.
Yeah. And obviously cooperation can cause another fallout, because you're eventually, inevitably, a marked man inside prison.
This guy is a marked man. He doesn't seem to care. He is strutting around the place, from all accounts, telling anyone who will listen, I killed Nick Martin. This isn't a guy that seems to give a crap. And I think he's probably feeling like he's safe because everyone hated Nick Martin, because Nick Martin was stealing from the club. So he knocked off a bloke that had very, very few friends at the end of his life. You've also got to remember that this sniper is a guy who is obviously pretty cool under pressure. Just go back to December 2020, and he's in his camouflage gear and he's peering through this scope for 15 minutes looking at his target. And the .308 that he's got is nestled up against his shoulder, and he's slowing his breathing. Now, he's managing to slow his breathing because even a tiny fraction of a millimetre off at the crosshairs will translate into a metre off the target 335 metres later. So he's slowing his breathing as he's been trained to, so that he can squeeze the trigger between heartbeats. How do you slow your breathing when you are thinking, if I miss, I'm going to kill a kid. If I get him, I'm going to have the biggest bikie gang in Australia trying to cram up my ass within seconds of me taking this shot. And in the back of his mind, before he squeezes that trigger, he's thinking, I have to get out of here so fast. He squeezes, he makes sure that Nick Martin is down. He makes sure he doesn't need to take a second shot. And then he gets through that fence, gets into the car or however he got away, and disappeared into the night.
someone close to the investigation and the court case told me, and I haven't had this confirmed by anything, but I do hope it's true, is the sniper only took one bullet. That's what I was told. He was that confident of making the shot. So, thrill seeker indeed. David Pye is currently due to go on trial in October this year. And if it goes ahead, that will be one of the most locked down, lit up criminal trials in recent WA history. We thought that would be the next time we would see the sniper in a courtroom, but that all changed this past Tuesday. For the past 3 months, I've been working on the right to bring another story about the Martin family and the Martin murder to the surface. In December last year, one day before the 3rd anniversary of Nick Martin's death, lawyers for his widow lodged a claim for damages against the state of Western Australia and the shooter. It claims that because Martin was shot and killed on licensed premises which the government has a primary interest in, then the family should be entitled to damages for the harm that death had caused on that property. Harv's lawyers I've spoken to this week have said this writ is very unusual for a number of reasons, and even Premier Roger Cook didn't even seem to know it existed until it was on the front page of the paper.
I think that one of the issues that will be thrown up is the idea of contributory negligence, where it wasn't just an innocent getting killed at a government-owned property. He brought something on himself.
It will be an interesting argument for sure if it goes ahead. And the postscript to that hearing this week. In preparation for it, the West's lawyers sent notice to Nick Martin's shooter in prison about our application. He surprisingly said he wanted to appear in court himself via video link. And when he did, and was asked by the judge what his opinion was, his stance was, I don't care if I'm identified in public, because anyone close to this case knows who I am already.
Everyone knows this guy's name. Everyone in jail knows this guy's name. Every cop in Australia knows this guy's name. Every journalist in Australia knows his name. And if you want to find his name, it's really easy.
But as it stands today, that man's name and picture cannot be published by us or anyone else because of other suppression orders in place. Even though, as Harves and I have said, he is a marked man inside and outside of prison. Thanks, Ben, for joining us on Caught in the Act again.
I think we'll be talking about this come October when the trial starts.
I really do hope so. And thanks to you all for joining us. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with us by writing to caughtintheact@wanews.com.au. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, if you want to know what's going on in court, don't get caught short. Get caught in the act instead. See you next week.